Hey everyone, at the end of last year I actually picked up a Tesla Model 3 to use on road trips throughout California and the rest of the United States. I got the rear-wheel drive, lowest end model that has around a 279-mile range on a full charge. Earlier this year I took a 2,500-mile road trip throughout California and Arizona, and I wanted to make this video to let you know what it's like to do a road trip that long in a Tesla in 2024. Let's start with the pros. My first pro is the Supercharger network. It is pretty amazing. Along the main route, there was always a Supercharger available whenever we needed it, and it was never very busy. There was times when there was only a couple cars out of the 30 plus stalls that were at a lot of them. I know this may change as they start to allow other cars to access that network in the future, but right now, the Supercharger network is by far the biggest pro of doing a road trip in a Tesla. My next pro was the route planning abilities through the Tesla app and the touchscreen in the car. Point A to point B route planning with the car is incredibly easy, as you just put in your destination and it'll tell you all the chargers that you need to stop at and how long you need to be at each one. Basically, it prioritizes the amount of time that you have to be there, and it tries to get the car to a charger at under 20%, which allows it to go fast all the way up to about 80%. There were times where I had to stop for 10 or 12 minutes and then told us to continue on as we didn't need to be there any longer. We visited more chargers than I thought we were going to visit, but we spent less time than I anticipated at each of the chargers, as it prioritized the time on the road versus the amount of time spent charging. At the end of the day, it definitely takes longer than using a gas car, but I didn't mind it, and it actually leads into my next pro, which is where the Superchargers were located. Based on the Supercharger location and the amount of time that you spend at each of them, it actually breaks the trip up a little bit, which was nice for someone like me who would just drive 8 hours in a row without stopping. Being forced to charge a few times on a long day of driving and having them be near restaurants or even coffee shops or things to do definitely made the trip a lot more relaxing. There were a couple Superchargers we stopped at that were at gas stations which weren't as exciting as the other ones, but during those stops we would just play chess or watch a movie in the car. And then during the stops that had something to do, we would get dinner at Cracker Barrel. There was even one that was next to a wildlife museum that we could go into. Overall, I was just impressed with where the chargers were located versus the things that you could do while you were charging. My next pro was the autopilot, which was probably on for about 80% of the trip. This is the autopilot, the one that comes with the car, not the full self-driving that is an extra charge, and I haven't even tried that for myself, so I'm not actually sure how that works. I really enjoyed autopilot as it takes a ton of stress out of the road trip. I could basically drive all day with limited stops and have a lot less fatigue than I'd had previously because the car did most of the work for me. I know not everyone enjoys this type of driving, but during the 2,500 miles that we were doing it, it was on about 80% of the time, and I really enjoyed it. There were only two times where I felt it overreacted a little bit. The first is when we were on a 2-lane road and a car turned in front of us on the 2-lane road. I thought it really overreacted with how much it stopped, relating to the car just coming in front of us to make the turn. And the second time is when we were kind of going up some steeper hills. It felt like it was a little bit confused as to whether or not it needed to brake going up the steeper hills. Other than that, the entire rest of the time we were driving with it, I thought it did great. Even my dad, who's been driving for a lot longer than I've been alive, turned it on, and after about the first 5 minutes of it being a little bit strange, he actually really enjoyed driving with it as well. My last pro is the entertainment system in the car. We basically never had problems connecting to music or getting traffic updates throughout the drive, even when we were in some of the more remote areas. And then of course, being able to watch a movie or beat my dad in chess when we were sitting at a charging area definitely makes for a really fun and kind of unique road trip. First, range anxiety is definitely a thing, and my range was a lot worse than I anticipated during a lot of portions of the trip. I would say that my car probably got around 220 miles reliably for the range, when 270 is the advertised range. I know it can change with wind and temperature and how fast you're driving, but overall I was a little bummed as I thought I would be getting more range than I actually did throughout the trip. Once, especially when we were driving in snow, it seemed to be significantly less than even that 220 that I planned on. I never had problems making it to a Supercharger since there's so many of them throughout the United States, but I definitely thought I'd be able to get a little bit further on each charge than I felt like I was. This leads me to my next con, which was actually the biggest one for me, and that was just the amount of extra planning it took to be able to do the road trip. This is a perfect car for point A to point B driving, so if you want to go from Los Angeles to New York, no problem. It'll plan all the superchargers for you, it will not be an issue. But if you do road trips like me where you're trying to stop and see different side things along the way and take in all of the different uniquenesses about a location, it can be a lot more stressful to figure out whether you can make it to some of these places and back to the main road to get to the next supercharger. I felt that I spent a ton of time planning out the route and whether or not the car could actually do the route that I wanted to with the chargers that were available. It ended up working out pretty well for me overall, but it did add a ton of time to my planning each day, and there were a few areas that I had to nix because my car couldn't actually make it to those areas and back to the supercharger. I'm guessing this wouldn't be as much of an issue if you got one of the longer range cars, but for the bottom of the line one that I got, it definitely is something that you have to take into consideration for a long road trip. My last con is just the charging infrastructure outside of the supercharging network. While I was doing this road trip, I really felt like the charging infrastructure for EVs outside of the supercharger network is definitely in its infancy. I would have expected a lot more hotels to have at least one charger that you could use when you were staying there, but of the 7 hotels that I stayed at, only one of them had an actual charger for an EV car. I'm sure I could have searched for hotels that had chargers built in, but I expected some of the major chains to just have a charger, and that's definitely not the way that it is currently. I did stay at a hotel with a charger in Tombstone, and it was an incredible experience as I just pulled up, plugged my car in, and the next morning it was at 100% when I left. But like I said, out of the 7 days I was in Arizona, this was the only one that I got to have that experience. Hopefully in the future, if EV cars continue to become a thing, a lot more of the hotels will at least have 1 or 2 chargers that people can use when they stay. Alright, so those are the pros and cons I had over my 2,500 mile drive through Arizona. I'm sure I'll do lots more road trips in this car in the future and be able to update this with more things if this is something that you're interested in. And if you have any additional questions about road tripping in an EV, be sure to leave those in the comments and I'll answer them as best as I possibly can. I do have to say I really love my Tesla. It's fun to drive, it's fast. My dad loved driving it. We loved being able to play games against each other when we were charging. Overall, it was a great road trip car, especially if they can get that range up so that I don't have to stress out or do as much planning beforehand. All right, I think that's it for this one. Let me know if you like videos like this. I will see you on the next one.